So greetings from Pennsylvania once again, and welcome back to another video. It's time for another installment in our Revolutionary War here in Pennsylvania series. So in the previous video we did the Battle of the Clouds, which is an interesting story. A battle that actually never happened, but could have been a pretty epic battle, but in the end the Clouds won that battle with a torrential rain, putting an end to a battle that could have been pretty decisive. But at the end of that video I mentioned, as Washington retreated from that area, which is just over there. We're here near Malvern, Pennsylvania, not too far from Philly, but the Battle of the Clouds took place just like 10 minutes away from here. So as Washington retreated, remember the Brits let him retreat because they were in no condition to follow him either because of the rain. Washington did leave some troops behind, about 1,200 troops under General Wayne, here in this area to kind of monitor and perhaps harass the British a bit and keep an eye on them. But things did not go so well for General Wayne and his troops, to say the least. He thought his position was undetected by the British, but they did know that he was there. But before we get into what happened, let's walk around here a little bit. We're here on the outskirts of Malvern. This is the Paoli Monument Park, I believe they call it. And they do have some monuments here for the battle. There's even some cannons up there, so a little bit more here. When we were at the Battle of the Clouds part, there really wasn't much there. Of course, there wasn't really much of a battle, but this one's a little bit more. And a little bit later, we'll be visiting a church, St. Peter's Church in the Great Valley, I believe it's called, where some of these combatants are buried on both sides. But yeah. Let's go over here. Let's see what these cannons are about first. Got quite a bit of information. Of course, some of these signboards will probably tell the story too before I begin telling it. But that's okay. Oh yeah, here we go. We bury our dead. Next day in the field of battle, all killed by the sword and bayonet. So yeah, that's looking at that right there. Yeah. On the morning after the battle, Colonel Adam Hubley of the 10th Pennsylvania wrote, "I set my major with 4 of our horsemen on the field who counted our dead bodies. The enemies were taken off. 2 or 3 British dead are believed to be buried in the church at St. Peter's in the Great Valley, which we're going to visit." 2 days later, Hubley stated, "We buried our dead next day in the field of battle. 52 brave fellows, all killed by the sword and bayonet. Local civilians buried the fallen at the fence line in 2 rows of 26. Tradition holds that another soldier was found 2 weeks later in the nearby woods and was buried where he lay." Yeah. So this must be that burial spot right here, where the 52 are buried, and the 53rd one somewhere else in the area. Beautiful cannons. And a plane flying overhead, of course. Yeah. Kind of hard to read that. It's encased in some plastic there. Plexiglass. Yeah, sorry, I just had to answer the phone there. Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about plexiglass, but I guess I'm trying to protect that. Maybe it was vandalized in the past, but I guess this is where those soldiers are buried, here in this mound. Yeah. There's a plaque over there, which I can't really read from here either, but yeah. Old, beautiful old stone wall. We do have it locked. Yeah. Give it a somber little spot here where the victims of this battle are buried. I didn't even get into what happened here yet, but we will shortly. I don't think I even mentioned what this battle was called yet. It's called the Battle of Paoli, because that's where we are. Sometimes it's known as the Paoli Massacre. We'll talk about that too. There are some information boards past the cemetery. There's some monuments back behind us we'll check out too. But yeah, as I mentioned, Wayne thought his position was undetected, but the British did know he was there, and Howe decided to attack. This took place on September 20th. Of course, the Battle of Brandywine took place on the 11th, which the Continental Army lost, allowing the British to eventually take Philadelphia. And then on the 16th, we had the Battle of the Clouds, which didn't actually take place. Well, it did, but the Clouds won. And on September 20th, you have this short little battle, the Battle of Paoli, or the Massacre of Paoli. But when General Howe, the British, realized that General Wayne and his troops were just like literally like 2 miles away, he decided, hey, let's attack. So he sent Major General Gray to attack, and they attacked at it started like at 10 at night. So this was overnight attack in the late evening. They either hired or bribed a local blacksmith to take them to where General Wayne and his troops were encamped, and they were under orders not to fire at all. It was supposed to be a silent march, like a surprise attack into the encampment. Here's a painting of the battle. Kind of hard to tell a little bit, yeah. It's all about saber-wielding British horsemen attacked a Continental infantryman. Then follows a dreadful scene of havoc. Yeah, talked about the Continental troops rode off firing pistols over their soldiers. I'm not gonna read all this for you, but yeah. You can always pause the video if you read all of it. Yeah, it talks about how the Continentals were firing muskets over their soldiers as they retreated after the surprise attack. Yeah, the light infantry rushed in upon their encampment, the British, directed by the light of their fires. That's how they knew where the colonials were encamped. Killed and wounded not less than 300 in their huts and about the fires. So yeah. So it did become a scene of chaos, to say the least. Now General Wayne did receive some information that the Brits were coming, and he had started to withdraw his troops, but he didn't get all of them withdrawn. There was some chaos even in that. So remember, the Brits were trying to sneak silently into camp. They weren't even firing their guns and stuff, but when they encountered the Continental sentries, some of those sentries fired at the British, kind of alerting the British as to where they were. And then even, like I said, they had their campfires and stuff. Remember, it was dark. You know, the colonial, I guess I could call it the colonial army. The Continental Army had their campfires there, which alerted the British to where they were. And they even fired, the colonial army even fired towards the British, even alerting them more to where their position was, because it was dark. But they could hear the fire and see the little flash from, their flintlock rifles. So that all helped guide the British to where they were encamped. This is cool. They do have quite a bit of information here. Wayne's force about 2,200. I'd read it was 1,200, but that's research for you. Men arrived on this ground during the afternoon of September 19th of 1777. Yeah, they were preparing to march towards the British, but threatening weather delayed them. They built like little wigwams like that to stay here. After dark, having received 2 warnings that he might be attacked, Wayne doubled the number of pickets and sent out horsemen to patrol the roads. You were standing near the center of Wayne's camp, approximately along the line of campfires. Yeah, it's talking about the British here. Ordered to remove their musket flints and rely solely on the bayonet. About 1,200, maybe that's where I got the number 1,200 from. 1,200 British troops, led by a dozen troopers of the Light Dragoons, moved silently towards Wayne's position. Yeah. Some men were already in retreat. A squad from his detachment searched Wayne's home. Yeah, but behaved politely towards the women. Yeah, 2 miles north of this camp, one of Wayne's horse patrols spotted the British attack force on Swedesford Road, challenged them, fired, and returned to give warning. Immediately, Wayne roused his soldiers and had them form up. When the British reached the Warren Tavern, they forced a blacksmith to guide them to this camp. Yeah. Sentries fired, exposing their positions in the dark, and the British rushed in with bayonets, killing and wounding half the pickets. Yeah, so we're right in the midst of it right here. On that evening, September 20th, this would have been quite the chaotic spot. Oh, there's someone's dog. They have a little cannon up here. We'll see what this is about. Looks like it's tipped over. Remember Paoli. Losing a wheel and crashing into the gap in the fence line, blocking the troops' evacuation route. I guess that's what it's... Oh yeah, it's lost a wheel right there. Yeah. Heeding intelligence reports and hearing the sound of combat coming from his early warning picket post, General Wayne ordered 4 irreplaceable cannons to quickly evacuate to Sugartown Road. Yeah. Infantry retreating towards the same muddy Sugartown Road were slowed by narrow gates and the local farmers' fences. Yeah, one of Wayne's fleeing cannons bumping on the narrow rutted road lost the wheel and crashed, blocking the escape route just as the Redcoats bully attacked and enveloped the stalled American forces. Yeah. The British showed no mercy and killed or maimed soldiers trying to surrender. We'll talk about that in a moment. Sugartown Road was finally cleared of the disabled cannon, but not before Americans suffered from ruthless carnage of the Redcoats' sword and bayonet charge. Yeah, so there's quite a bit of debate about that part there. Like I said, this is called the Battle of Paoli, or sometimes it's called the Paoli Massacre. There's debate about that. There's tales and first-hand accounts that the British gave no quarter. In other words, showed no mercy. So, as that sign says there, that they just bayoneted and killed soldiers trying to surrender. You know, killed them in their sleep if they were still in their huts and things like that. It was a massacre. That's debatable. That's questionable. That's coming. Some of that is what you call propaganda. During wartime, you know, you exaggerate things to rouse people up against the enemy, to rouse the soldiers. Like I said, that became a battle cry back there. But in reality, other accounts say that that is not what happened. That there wasn't a full-on massacre here. That the British didn't just start slaughtering everyone, even those who had surrendered or sleeping and things like that. It was a total rout of the Continental troops. It was total chaos. Whether or not the British started massacring people that had already surrendered, soldiers that had already surrendered, that's questionable. But that's the reality of wartime. Stories get exaggerated. I mean, there are massacres in wartime, but from what I've read, most accounts say that there wasn't really truly a massacre here. In some ways there were. You know, 53 Continental soldiers lost their life. Many were wounded, many were captured. But if it was a true massacre, all those that were wounded and captured would have been killed as well, but they weren't. In fact, there were quite a few that were wounded heavily that were just left in the area, just left in some of the local houses because they couldn't be moved. The British just left them there. They didn't just kill them, they just left them in the care of people who lived in the houses. So that kind of puts away with the massacre idea. Alright, we didn't even make it up to the main monument way up there yet. So that's kind of a summary of what happened there. You know, Wayne was left behind to harass, to monitor their troops, to attack their baggage train, things like that if necessary. He thought his position was undetected, but it wasn't. The British decided, hey, let's attack him. He was kind of planning an attack himself. But the British did it at night, you know, 10 o'clock. And they snuck in. Wayne was kind of alerted, but I guess because they took action a little bit too late, got bogged down by some issues, wagon wheels falling off the wagon and stuff like that, and it just ended up being a total rout. British just totally, yeah. I know, a lot of panic and confusion, chaos is what the end result was. And a pretty significant, you know, and demoralizing loss for the Continental Army, to say the least. There's something right there with a marker on it, but we'll check out some of these signs and monuments in a moment here. Let's see what this is first. Doesn't really look like it has anything to do with the battle, so anyway, let's move on. Number of information boards. Kind of nice little park here. Oh yeah, we gotta head to that one church yet too. I think some British soldiers are buried. Oh, this is the same painting that we saw earlier, but in nicer condition. You see on the bayonet charge, the redcoats. That's what guided the British to the lines. They saw the fires. Someone's getting bayoneted down there. But yeah, so if you're sneaking into someone's camp, you see the light of their fires guides you right to the camp. That was kind of the problem. So if Wayne knew the British were coming, maybe you should have put the fires out. That might have been a smart thing to do, but anyway. History is history. Now let's just talk about Malvern Memorial Parade. We got the American flag. It's just their marker for the men of the borough of Malvern and townships east and west of. Oh, this is a World War marker. Okay, let's head over here. Someone parks their car right in front of our monuments. And what do we have here? This memorial is dedicated to those who unselfishly gave their lives so that we, the living veterans, may continue to serve our country and our community and our God. Directed by Post 5203. Yeah, there are a number of monuments here for other wars. This one's dedicated to World War II veterans. In memory of the boys who made the supreme sacrifice. Yeah, on this hallowed battlefield, we recognize the men and women who gave their lives, and to all veterans who served our nation since World War II with our courage and honor. Dedicated to the American veteran. All kinds of battles on there. All right, but I think this is the one for the Paoli. Yeah. Here repose the remains of 53 American soldiers who were the victims of cold-blooded cruelty in the well-known massacre at Paoli, while under the command of General Anthony Wayne, an officer whose military conduct, bravery, and humanity were equally conspicuous throughout the Revolutionary War. See, there's more of that talk about the massacre. Cold-blooded. Here's the other side. This one's hard to read. The atrocious massacre which this stone commemorates was perpetrated by British troops under the immediate command of Major General Gray. Once again, the atrocious massacre. Yeah, the sun's not at the best angle. Sacred to the memory of the patriots who on this spot fell sacrificed to British barbarity during the struggle for American independence. So once again, you see a lot of that talk, British barbarity, atrocious acts, cold-blooded, killings of the American troops. We talked about that a little bit earlier there. Maybe, who knows, maybe some British soldiers got a little overzealous. It was during the chaos and the panic. Maybe some were killed, but from research I read, a lot of that talk is probably an exaggeration of what actually happened here. You might disagree with me, but just from the research I did, that's one of the things when you study history, you gotta kind of, sometimes you get really passionate about your side that you're on and just believe whatever you read, but you gotta take things with a balance. You gotta balance that approach with history sometimes, because those terms, atrocious massacre and cold-blooded murder, those are all used as kind of like a battle cry. Remember Paoli, to help to fire the colonial troops up, help them to fight the British more. But yeah, we could go on about that. But yeah. Hey, but was there an actual massacre here? You can let me know what you think in the comments. If you disagree with me, if you agree with all the signage that there was an all-out massacre here of surrendered troops and wounded troops. The British just killed them all. Like I said, I don't really agree with that. There might have been some acts of atrociousness, but that is war. That's what happens. But yeah, pretty neat little park here, though. The Battle of Paoli, or it's often called the Massacre of Paoli, or the Paoli Massacre. Yeah, quite a bit to see here and read about the battle. Yes, I'm back by this grave site where the 52 colonial troops are buried. I think altogether there's about 300 wounded, killed, and taken captive. So, like I said earlier, if it was a true massacre, then there'd be far more than these 52 plus the 53rd that's buried somewhere else. There've been far more than that killed, to be honest. All the wounded and the ones taken captive would have been killed too. But anyway, we'll let that go. But we're gonna head to that church, St. Peter's Church in the Valley, I think it's called. where there's some, I think there's some British troops buried there. So it wasn't, the British did lose a number of troops here, maybe around 4 I read or so. That's the problem with research too, every site you go to has different numbers sometimes. But let's head up there, just to get both sides of the story. We're here at this burial ground. Let's go find the other one. All right, let's head up there. All right, we have made it to St. Peter's Church, about 10 minutes or more from where we were, if you take a wrong turn, which I did. So somewhere around here, there's an old, yeah, so here's the old cemetery. But somewhere around here are some markers, I think for some British troops. The cemetery extends beyond that wall too, but let's see what we can find. I saw a picture online, some British flags right along the wall, so that's what we're looking for. There's some nice big trees here. That's a huge red oak tree. There were some big ones over there too. This must be a pretty old church. Oh, I see there's a wall that extends all the way down that way too. Alright, so where are these graves? I came up from this way. I didn't see any flags from up that way. I mean, there's plenty of American flags. Alright, we are in. Actually, that's probably the church up there. I was looking at that earlier over that way. Oh, you know what? I see them way up there. I see some British flags. A lot of planes flying overhead. There's plenty of Revolutionary War soldiers on the American side here too. There's one right here. They have these. Oh no, that's I don't know if that war. That's not Revolutionary War. Anyway, had the round medallion. Anyway, so as an American, why would I be so interested in visiting some British graves? You know, my enemies. You know, well, as I said, to be a true historian, you have to be neutral. You have to put aside things like that. You know. These British soldiers fought in the war too, fighting for their cause. And beyond, I was thinking about that whole massacre idea on the way here. I think part of the problem is that for us Americans is that that was a brilliantly executed British maneuver there, that battle there. They handled that really well, and they defeated us there at that battle, made us look pretty bad. So sometimes to counter that, you got to try to make the British look really bad. Say, oh, they massacred and they killed innocent, you know, soldiers that surrendered and stuff. I think it's part of the issue, actually. That's just the truth, folks. Got to be neutral when you study history. Like I teach in my science classes where I teach, we talk about bias a lot, and when it comes to science, you know, our bias, our opinions get in the way. Same thing can happen in history. You got to put your bias aside, study history for what it is. As another plane flies overhead. Yeah, but here is the spot. They have American and British flags here. Couple of stones. So these are probably just old markers. There's a British flag, there's an American flag, and a British flag. So yeah, so these are just, not sure who these people are. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 7 stones here. So I guess there's British and Americans buried here. I just think it's cool that they honor the British soldiers as well, have their flags up along with the American flags. You know, this war is long over. You know, we're no longer enemies with the British, so their dead should be honored as well. Even yeah, I was just thinking, even during a time of war, the enemies dead should be honored as well and treated with respect. Alright, the cool spot here by this really old church. This might be a fun place to explore sometime. Yeah, let's take one more look. It's just what remains of a battle that was fought, 250 years ago or so. Just some of the dead. Of course, we had at the other spot, we have about 52 folks were buried, soldiers. But I think that'll be it for this video, folks. Like I said, don't let your bias get in the way of your research, whether it's science or history. Try to stay neutral, because it can just get it just gets in the way. To be honest, in war, I don't care who it is, both sides commit atrocities. We like to think that our side is the perfect and pure and righteous side. It's not always the case, folks. War is ugly on both sides. Anyway, just some thoughts. Yeah, I had a fun time exploring these sites today, the Battle of the Clouds, which I didn't really, the previous video, the Battle of the Clouds, I didn't really know much about that battle until I made this video, and even this Paoli Massacre, or Battle Paoli, I didn't know a whole lot about it until I did the research on it. So anyway, thanks for coming along, folks. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one.